The night sky burned red as artillery shells streaked across the horizon, shattering the silence of the valley below. Smoke hung heavy in the air, and the ground trembled with every distant explosion. Amid the chaos of two nations locked in war, a young soldier named Daniel crouched behind a fallen wall, clutching his rifle and trying to steady his breath. He had been fighting for months, so long, in fact, that he could barely remember what silence sounded like. He wasn't fighting for glory anymore. Those illusions had burned away with the first volley. Now, it was survival and the faint, stubborn hope that someday the war would end, and he could go home to a world that still had color in it. Across the field, on the other side of the shattered bridge that once connected two peaceful villages, a nurse named Eileen moved through the ruins of an abandoned farmhouse. She wasn't supposed to be there. Her unit had withdrawn hours ago, but she stayed behind to tend to the wounded left in the chaos. Her uniform was from the enemy side, or so Daniel would see it, but to her, it was just cloth. The wounded didn't care what colors she wore. That night, fate decided to bring them together. Daniel had been ordered to scout the bridge and confirm if the enemy had occupied it. He moved quietly, his boots crunching against gravel and ash. The moon was half hidden behind clouds, and in its dim light, he saw a flicker of a lantern moving inside the farmhouse. He froze, raised his rifle, and watched through the shattered doorway. A woman knelt beside a wounded man, wrapping his leg with the blood-soaked bandage. Her hands shook, but she worked with precision. Daniel's training screamed that she was the enemy, but his heart, which had grown numb from months of killing, felt something stir, a curiosity, maybe even pity. He stepped closer, his rifle aimed, and whispered, "Don't move." Alina's head snapped up, her eyes a blue, tired, but steady aim at his through the smoke. She didn't scream or run, she simply looked at him, as though she'd been expecting this moment. "There's no one left here to fight," she said softly. Her accent carried the rhythm of the language he'd been taught to hate. "Only the dying." Daniel hesitated. The man she was treating groaned, blood pooling beneath him. He was barely conscious. "Step away," Daniel ordered, but his voice trembled. "I can't," she replied, her voice barely more than a whisper. "If I stop now, he dies." Daniel didn't know why, but he lowered his weapon slightly. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe it was the way her words sliced through the noise of war like a prayer. He watched her press a claw to the soldier's wound, whispering something under her breath, not in English, but it didn't matter. The tone was universal. Compassion. Minutes passed like hours. When she finally looked up, her hands were shaking. The wounded man's breathing had slowed peaceful, almost until it stopped entirely. Alina bowed her head. Daniel stood there, unsure of what to do. For a moment, there was no war, just two strangers caught in a storm neither of them started. She wiped her tears and said, "Now you can do what you came to do." Daniel swallowed hard. "I didn't come to kill a nurse." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Then maybe there's still hope." He could have taken her prisoner. He could have radioed his position and called for backup. Instead, he told her to stay low, and disappeared into the shadows. But fate wasn't done with them. 2 nights later, a skirmish erupted near the same valley. Daniel's unit was ambushed, and chaos followed. He was hit in the leg and dragged himself into the woods, bleeding and delirious. Hours passed. He lost track of time, stumbling through fog and pain until he collapsed near a stream. When he woke, there was warmth, a fire, and a familiar face bending over him. "You shouldn't be alive," Alina said, her voice breaking through the haze. He blinked in disbelief. "How broken, Bar?" "I found you near the river," she said. "I thought you were one of ours. Then I saw your uniform." Daniel tried to sit up, but she pressed a gentle hand to his chest. "Don't move, you'll tear the stitches." He looked down and saw his leg bandaged and her work again. "You saved me," he said, stunned. "You saved me first," she replied quietly. "Now we're even." For days, she hid him in a cellar beneath the farmhouse. She brought him food, cleaned his wounds, and spoke little. But silence has a way of creating its own language between them. Words weren't needed. Glances, gestures, and quiet moments filled the space. One evening, as rain drummed against the roof, Daniel asked, "Why are you helping me?" Alina hesitated. "Because I'm tired," she said finally. "Tired of being told who to hate. Tired of watching boys die for land that will bury them." He nodded. "I used to think we were fighting for freedom. Now I'm not sure what freedom means anymore." She looked at him. May really looked at him. And for the first time in months, she saw a human being, not a uniform. The war had drawn lines between them, but here, underground, those lines blurred. In the days that followed, they talked about the lives they once had. Daniel told her about the orchard near his home, where he used to climb trees with his sister. Alina spoke of the lake near her village, where the water turned gold at sunset. In those stories, they built a world untouched by war, a fragile, but beautiful. Then came the day they couldn't hide anymore. Patrols began sweeping the area. Daniel knew they'd be discovered soon. He tried to convince Alina to leave, but she refused. "If they find you here, they'll kill you," she said. "And if they find you helping me, they'll kill you too," he shot back. They argued quietly, both terrified but unwilling to admit it. Then, in a moment of desperate silence, she reached for his hand. Her fingers trembled, but her touch was steady. "Maybe they will," she whispered. "But at least for once, I chose who to save." Daniel's throat tightened. There were no right words, only the truth in his eyes, the ache in his chest. The world outside was crumbling, but in that small, hidden space, they found something stronger than fear. The sound of boots echoed in the distance. Alina froze. Daniel reached for his rifle, but she shook her head. "No more killing," she said. He hesitated, then lowered the weapon. The door above them burst open. Voices shouted in a language Daniel couldn't understand, and rough hands dragged him from the cellar. He was thrown to the ground, surrounded by soldiers. Alina ran after them, screaming in her own tongue, trying to explain, but they pushed her aside. One of the officers recognized her uniform and barked orders. Daniel realized too late what was happening. They thought she had betrayed them by hiding an enemy soldier. He struggled against his captors, shouting, "She saved my life. Don't hurt her." But his words meant nothing. In war, mercy is often the first casualty. Alina was forced to her knees. A soldier raised his weapon. Daniel's voice cracked as he shouted again, "No." She looked at him, calm, resolute, even as fear flickered in her eyes. "Don't forget me," she whispered. The shot echoed through the valley. Time slowed. Daniel lunged forward, only to be struck down. He never saw her fall. He didn't need to. He felt it, like the sky itself had shattered. He was taken prisoner, dragged across the border, and locked away in a camp where days bled into each other. He refused to speak. He refused to fight. And at night, when the cold bit through his bones, he thought of her voice, her courage, her mercy in a world that had forgotten both. Months later, the war ended, the prisoners were freed, and Daniel returned home. The orchard was still there, but the world felt smaller, emptier. He tried to rebuild his life, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. The nurse who saved him, the woman who showed him that even across battle lines, love could bloom like a wildflower through the cracks of destruction. Years passed, nations rebuilt, the scars of war faded from the land, but not from his heart. One spring, he traveled east to the country that had once been his enemy. He had no clear reason, only a promise he felt bound to keep. In a small village near the river, he found a cemetery marked by a single stone cross, overgrown with ivy. The inscription was in her language, but he knew the name, Alina. He knelt beside the grave, placing a white lily on the soil. The air was still. "I made it home," he whispered. "Because of you." He sat there for a long time, speaking to the wind, telling her about the world they had dreamed of, one without borders, without fear. And as the sun dipped below the hills, he felt something warm against his face, a breeze that carried the scent of rain and wildflowers. It felt like her. Danielle smiled faintly. "I didn't forget," he said. In the quiet that followed, the war seemed a distant memory. What remained was the love that had defied it. A fragile, impossible, but real love that had crossed the battle line, and somehow survived. And in that moment, the world felt whole again. Would you like me to create 11 prompts plus title plus thumbnail description with hashtags for this story, like your previous video projects?